What's good, folks? It's Nightmare Frame here with a new video coming at you with Warframe's most common misconceptions. Surprisingly enough, these things are always confused, misinterpreted, or just not explained right, and people don't always want to go to the wiki to read some long ass paragraphs, and the game does a bad job at explaining the most simplest things. I'll start with the most basic one that's always confused by a lot of players: damage type and their status effects. And how are these two things different, you may ask? Well, let's use corrosive and radiation for example. The corrosive elemental damage will deal 75% more damage to ferrite armor, which is found on most Grineer units. Now, this is just the damage type, so even if you have 0% status chance, you will still deal 75% more damage to ferrite, because that is the damage type they are weak to. Now, when the status effect procs, you get corrosion, which will begin to degrade armor, and this only happens if you have status chance. So the higher your status chance, the more likely you are to proc status effects with the modded damage type, and if the enemy can be affected by status effects. So the less armor they have, the more damage they take from the damage type they are weak to. And now corrosion armor strip caps at 80%, so you can't fully armor strip with a corrosive status effect. But this makes corrosive damage even stronger than it was before, because back in the days, if enemies lose their ferrite armor, their weakness to corrosive will be gone with it, and the enemies will develop a new weakness. Take a look at EIDOLONs for example. They're immune to status effects, but we still use radiation damage against their alloy armor, which takes 75% more damage from. If the radiation status effect procs, they'll be confused and attack their allies, but they don't. And for us to deal more damage against the EIDOLONs, everyone in a 4-man squad will run the aura corrosive projection, but when in a 3 to a 2-man squad, you will take the Sarpa with shattering impact for the additional armor strip. Also, another one that really confuses people is heat. Listen up, heat is the damage type and the status effect is called ignite. Two different things. When enemies are ignited, they panic and have their overall armor reduced by 50%. Not stripped, but reduced, meaning that you have less to strip. So when you combine it with corrosive, the armor reduction is multiplicative, but the armor stripping is capped at 80%. So it's not always ideal to run corrosive and heat. However, heat damage is actually quite strong on its own, as it stacks on itself, scaling linearly, and doesn't have a separate instance of damage over time like bleeds and toxin. So the more heat procs, the more single damage tick you deal, which scales with faction mods, and especially when you have a separate weapon to build up viral stacks to deal multiplicative health damage, which works real well when paired with bleeds, electricity, and heat. Now, you don't want to mod your weapon with viral and heat, but have a separate instance, because once you force mods onto your weapon, that damage begins to diminish and is greatly reduced. So you never want to mod for 3 elemental mods, but have other sources of damage multipliers like crits, range, status build-up. Fortunately, weapons like the Jat Kuzar and Sylvan Aegis have base heat, which will benefit a lot more from this because of its modding versatility. If you want to learn more about damage and melee modding, and also advanced EIDOLON tips and tricks, check out these 2 videos for more detailed information. Now, another thing people don't understand is Rhino's Roar. There are people that think Roar gives power strength. Who told you that? Roar is a damage multiplier buff, but of course Warframe's wording on the abilities really suck. Basically, Rhino multiplies your overall damage, and on weapons it works like Bane mods, which will add onto the Bane if you're already using one, and it increases the outgoing damage on abilities. But there are frames like Nidus and Equinox which can actually boost other players' power strength, which in turn can increase Roar's buff. Moving on to Mesa and her Shatter Shield. Again, it's badly worded. This isn't a real damage reduction, but projectile redirection. It reduces damage taken from enemy gunfire. The shield reflects hit scan fire back to the attacker and deflects projectile fire. So if any melee enemy or attack or even splash damage from explosive weaponry hits you, you're pretty much dead. So this isn't an end-all be-all damage reduction. Another thing that's not really explained properly in Warframe, and that's additive and multiplicative damage, and how they're not displayed or even shown in mods. Let's take a look at Pressure Point and Condition Overload, both being an additive damage increase for melees, and how running both is bad because more additive damage will have diminishing returns. Additive damage is just a raw increase in damage, nothing special. Pressure Point gives you a set in stone raw damage value, while Condition Overload stacks up on raw damage with each status effect on a target. Your melee doesn't have to be the one proccing the status effects, but you can always have any other weapon or Warframe do that for you, so your next strike will be quite devastating. Crit chance and crit multipliers are other ways of increasing and multiplying your damage output, and add elemental combinations that the faction you're up against is weak to. And if they have armor and shields, you want to strip those defenses or even bypass them so you deal even more damage. So there's a lot of things that go into modding to have you deal more damage because you want to add and then multiply. So modding for Prime Pressure Point and Condition Overload along with Blood Rush and Sacrificial Steel are both bad, really bad, and actually kill your damage. Pretty numbers on the modding section doesn't mean you will do more damage. Warframes have damage increase buffs. For example, Rhino's Roar multiplies your overall damage. Chroma's Fury from Vex Armor is an additive damage that works like raw damage mods like Serration and Pressure Point. So this is why you don't mod weapons with raw damage when playing with Chroma. Mirage is a weapon damage multiplier that's calculated after a weapon's total damage value. Banshee's Sonar is a deadly damage multiplier where highlighted enemy body parts will take multiplicative damage from all sources. Nova's Molecular Prime will have affected enemies take 200% multiplicative damage from all sources. The damage multiplier only works on armored and health targets. Shields will not have the damage multiplier applied. Equinox's Dayform Metamorphosis is an additive weapon damage increase. Mesa's Shooting Gallery is another additive weapon damage increase. Vauban's Overdriver is a weapon damage multiplier and pairs well with his passive and his Flechette Orb. Nyx, when she releases her fourth ability, Absorb, gains an additive weapon damage increase. So that's a little example for you. Here's another one, Pseudo-exalted weapons. There are 4 Warframes in the game with Pseudo-exalted weapons, and those are Atlas with Landslide, Gara with Shattered Lash, Korra with Whipclaw, and Excalibur with Slash Dash. Yup, Excalibur is the only Warframe that has both a pseudo and an exalted weapon, but unfortunately the Slash Dash damage is quite horrible and it's better for survivability, and it's better off used as a survivability and mobility tool. Garuda's Talent's passive is a weird hybrid, so it doesn't count. These pseudo-exalted weapons scale from Warframe mods and melee equipped mods. So to increase the damage scaling of these abilities, you would need a stat stick. A stat stick is a melee weapon not used as a traditional weapon, okay? But just a vessel that uses the equipped mods to boost the damage output of the Warframe's melee ability. That means the melee doesn't matter, just the mods. So all the stats you see on the melee after modding do not matter, just the mods. And the only time the melee will matter if you're trying to go for a Riven, because the Riven disposition will determine how high the attributes of the Riven will be, so you can get a higher damage output. All you have to do is pick a weapon and put mods in them, as you're not modding the weapon but for the ability. But each Warframe stat stick has to be modded differently, as they scale differently and have their own stats. And those are some of the most common misconceptions in Warframe. I'm sure there are a lot more, but these are the ones discussed and asked a lot during my streams and even in the comment section. But anyway, I do hope you've learned something from this video, and if you did, feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, peace.